The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I rise to take a call in the second reading to express the Labor Party's support for the bill. It is part of our ongoing commitment to an open and an internationalist engagement with the world and to build good, strong, multilateral institutions that allow for the economic and social and governance development of our region. So having said that, there's been an enormous amount of naivety expressed around the House in this debate so far, and it behoves us, I think, to lift the bonnet on this and just look underneath at what the engine really is. Can I just pick up a couple of the arguments that have been used by the last two speakers from the National Party? The last speaker but one used arguments of such subtlety and meaning as Asia's got 6 out of our top 10 markets, therefore we must support this development bank. Well, there are 1 or 2 steps between acknowledging that there are a lot of countries in Asia with whom we trade and that a particular investment in a particular bank is in New Zealand's national interest. What, for example, is the role of that bank? Exactly what type of infrastructure does it seek to promote? What role would there be for New Zealand in the governance of that bank? And what economic or geopolitical benefits would flow to New Zealand from membership as opposed to not being in it? Those are valid questions. The point is they are somewhat deeper than just saying, well, 6 out of our top 10 markets are in Asia, as if that's a lay-down misere. It is not, and I think the House deserves a better quality of debate. Likewise, Mr McKelvey saying, I have no problem putting money in Asia, he's got plenty, rather than New Zealand. Well, yes, that's good, it's internationalist, it's outward looking, tick that box, but that's not a sufficient answer either. What is the role of this bank? Why is New Zealand investing in it? It's a substantial amount of money, 92 million US dollars, about 140 million Kiwi on today's exchange rate. That is, goodness me, that's more than 4 times the amount the government's spending on the flag referendum. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and it's coming out of that thing called the Future Investment Fund. Remember when they sold down New Zealand's sovereign state assets, they created a fund which they euphemistically called the Future Investment Fund that was to be spent on things like schools and hospitals and Chinese or Asian investment banks. No, that was never in the press release. This is the most abused, overused fund in the history of PR propaganda. It is a ridiculous overstatement. There's Tony Soprano Light. Tony Soprano Light has picked up out of his slumber and he couldn't resist the opportunity to have a jab. Just didn't say anything useful. Let's see what the international commentators, Mr Speaker, are saying about the AIIB before we try to confirm that joining it is in New Zealand's national interest. So here is a very, I think, useful article by a Hong Kong-based economic strategist which makes the following several points. Firstly, that the United States resisted the idea of the AIIB, which is very clearly the creature of the government of the People's Republic of China. That does not make it a bad thing to do. As I say, Labor supports joining it and supports the bank, and a former head of the New Zealand Treasury, Mr John Whitehead, was, I understand, materially involved in setting up the governance arrangements for the bank, and that is a good thing. But the point is that the United States was the primary sponsor of the Bretton Woods international financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and a perception has, on the one hand, grown up that perhaps they haven't invested sufficiently in the infrastructure of some parts of Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, and that there's therefore a gap in the infrastructure market. The political take on that is that there are some powers in the Asia region that would be very happy if that gap was not filled by what they see as American-backed mechanisms. They would rather have a Beijing-backed mechanism. Now that may or may not be a right thing. Well, how does New Zealand align itself or take a position on that issue? That's a serious geostrategic question. But let's go into that debate understanding the underlying international political significance of this institution. This is one of the first, if not the first, major international financial institutions to be created since Bretton Woods was set up many decades ago. This is a major development. It signifies the rise of a new global economic power in Asia, and New Zealand is confronted with a significant decision about whether to join or not. If it wasn't significant, we wouldn't be putting $140 million hard-earned dollars into it. That is a significant investment by New Zealand. The Hong Kong strategist goes on to note that China, which is backing the AIIB, had sought to participate more actively in the Asia Development Bank, but the largest shareholder in that is Japan, and it always has a Japanese president and a high level of Japanese influence on its governance. So China, understandably enough, wanted to create another vehicle in which it had a higher level of influence. The strategist goes on to make the point that the counterfactual is that a lot of China's existing resource flows, its investments to develop the infrastructure of resource-providing partners in the region, and it mentions in particular a railway line in Laos as one example, that's been done bilaterally rather than multilateral and often a little murky in its governance, says the article. So the counterfactual is that we can be part of creating a new institution which has more transparent governance, which is regional rather than bilateral, and in which New Zealand has a seat at the table. Those are reasonable arguments to weigh up, and the Labour Party's come to the view that in fact it is probably in our national interest to be part of that, given that New Zealand former officials have been instrumental in the design. However, I now want to turn to the Select Committee report and to the national interest analysis, so-called, that's been provided by our diplomats at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It is remarkable because there are no numbers in it. This is not the first time, sir, I have risen in this House and complained about the qualitative nature of a so-called analysis piece that should contain hard estimates on the return on the investment of $140 million of New Zealand taxpayers' money. The kind of lines that have been given out by the government are the main benefits to New Zealand include increased economic development in the Asian region, tick, with flow-on benefits for New Zealand, question mark. What are they? What are the transmission mechanisms? Has anyone done any kind of sensitivity analysis on the impact of trade flows or even mapped out which sectors they're likely to be in? There is no evidence of that kind of analysis. Carrying on, Mr. Speaker, it supports increased economic integration in the Asian region. Yes, by definition it does, but with a particular geopolitical slant. It augments our existing relationships. It most certainly does. Here's the key point. By signing up to the AIIB, New Zealand will be building its relationship with the People's Republic of China. That is a good thing. At the same time, New Zealand is busily, according to the government, negotiating to be a party to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, thus ingratiating itself with the United States government. So heaven, it seems, in an era of emerging superpower competition in the Asia-Pacific region, is to be in good with both. Now, that is not an illogical position for New Zealand. I just want New Zealanders to understand what is going on when we are spending $140 million of their money. That's what this is about. So this is about keeping a foot in the camp of an emerging institution that's Beijing-driven, while also being part of a negotiation, according to the government, of a Washington-driven TPPA, thus keeping both sides happy. That's why we're spending $140 million here today. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong as long as we know why we are doing it and as long as we are well informed. I believe New Zealand's, and Labour believes New Zealand's contribution is as an honest broker, as a country which is no threat to anybody, a country with a reputation for integrity and transparency that has, in the development of this proposal, been able to contribute to the good governance of the bank. With the transparency that brings, Mr. Speaker, Labour supports this bill but we do want New Zealanders to understand why our country is investing in it. Thank you.